A few minutes after 9 on a Tuesday night, a Grosse Pointe Farms police lieutenant rolled past St. Paul on the Lake Catholic Church and noticed a silver Lexus SUV sitting alone in the one-way exit drive. The prayer service had ended. The lot was quiet. The Lexus was parked at an odd angle near the shoreline, close enough that the lake felt like part of the same scene. He pulled in, ran the plate, and walked up to the window. A purse and a wallet were visible inside, left in plain sight. The driver's seat was empty. Nothing in the cabin suggested an accident or a breakdown. It looked like someone stepped out and expected to return. Earlier that evening, JoAnn Romain had been exactly where her family expected her to be. She was 55, a mother of 3, and known for how seriously she took her Catholic faith. She drove to St. Paul on the lake for a 7 p.m. prayer service in Grosse Pointe Farms. People saw her inside and remembered nothing frantic or out of place. She prayed, spoke with familiar faces, and left the church afterward. At home, her daughter Michelle expected her mother to return soon. When JoAnn didn't, the worry began as irritation and turned into dread. Michelle called. No answer. She called again, then again, listening to the same empty ring. And then the situation flipped. Before the family had even made a missing person report, police were already treating the abandoned Lexus as an emergency. Officers made contact with the family and asked the question that turns a normal night into a nightmare. Was JoAnn missing? Michelle and other family members drove to the church and saw the SUV for themselves. Personal items were still inside. To them, it looked less like a woman setting out to vanish and more like a woman stepping away briefly, expecting to come back. The car's placement in the exit drive didn't read like a deliberate final parking choice. It looked like a hurried stop. If JoAnn had chosen to die, why leave behind the things most people reach for without thinking? Identification, money, and a phone that could help you if you were lost, scared, or stranded. Responders moved fast toward the most obvious possibility. With the church so close to Lake St. Clair, officers feared she might be in the water. A dive team was activated, and the U.S. Coast Guard was contacted as the search expanded beyond the parking lot. Floodlights swept across the surface, while officers scanned the shoreline and the narrow strip of ground between pavement and water. Investigators later said they followed footprints in the snow from the church lot toward Lake St. Clair, a detail that became central to the official explanation. JoAnn left her vehicle and walked toward the lake. But even that detail didn't settle the case because it didn't explain everything. It didn't explain why JoAnn would abandon her purse and wallet. It didn't explain how a person could enter the water during an active search and still not be found. And it didn't explain why the lake, searched early and aggressively, gave back nothing. The first night bled into the next day. JoAnn didn't come home. Friends and relatives were contacted. The family insisted she was not suicidal, describing her as deeply tied to her children and routine, the kind of person who showed up when she said she would. They also said she had been fearful in the months leading up to her disappearance, a claim that later became part of the public story as the case drew attention far beyond Grosse Pointe. As days passed without answers, the geography started to matter in a grim way. St. Paul on the lake sits on Lake Shore Drive by Lake St. Clair, but those waters connect into channels and currents that feed the Detroit River system. If JoAnn had entered the lake, searchers had to accept that she might not be in the immediate area. They searched anyway. They searched the lake and nearby shoreline. The family waited for a call that would explain everything, and instead got only more silence and more questions. Then, in March, the case changed shape. Fishermen found a body in a channel of the Detroit River. The remains were recovered and identified as JoAnn Romain. 70 days after she left church, she was found far from the place where her Lexus had been left behind, in the same connected waterways responders had been thinking about from the beginning. Police concluded she drowned and believed it was suicide, stating that she walked into Lake St. Clair. In later reporting, police were described as believing she did it in high heels, stepping into freezing water near the church. For JoAnn's family, that explanation was the start of a second struggle. They argued that the logistics didn't add up with what happened that night. The speed and intensity of the search, the visibility created by floodlights, and the distance her body would have had to travel through connected waters before she was recovered. To them, it didn't feel like a case where a person quietly slipped away. It felt like a case where something happened in the gap between a church door and a parked vehicle, and then the scene was forced to fit a conclusion. Their suspicion narrowed to one name within their own family. JoAnn's cousin, Timothy "Tim" Matuk, became the person JoAnn's daughters said she feared. They described a family argument and said they believed it was connected to her disappearance. Tim Matuk has denied involvement, has never been arrested or charged, and has said publicly that he was the target of a witch hunt. In 2021, he said he was working the night JoAnn vanished and that phone records supported where he was. The dispute did not stay private. It moved into lawsuits and public accusations about how the investigation was handled. JoAnn's estate alleged misconduct and a cover-up by officers and departments. In 2019, a federal appeals court affirmed summary judgment for the defendants, describing the estate's theory as requiring a wide conspiracy and leaving the official conclusion unchanged in the aftermath of that civil litigation. But legal outcomes didn't quiet the case in the community. Local coverage continued for years, and the story later reached a wider audience through national true crime media. In January 2024, reporting noted a $200,000 reward for credible tips that lead to an arrest. In January 2025, JoAnn's daughters again went on camera, criticizing what they said were investigative failures and demanding renewed attention to evidence and the early decisions that shaped the case. In late March 2025, the family publicly asked the Michigan Attorney General's office to reopen or independently review the case. Days later, the Attorney General's office said it would not reopen or review the investigation, explaining that it does not accept case referrals from private attorneys and that reviews typically come through law enforcement agencies or elected prosecutors. For the family, it was another door closing without the fresh forensic work they believed the case needed. What remains is a timeline that is clear and a story that is not. JoAnn attends a 7 p.m. prayer service. Her SUV is discovered abandoned around 9 p.m., purse and wallet still inside. Investigators say footprints in the snow led toward Lake St. Clair. A search begins immediately. 70 days later, her body is found in a Detroit River channel. Police believe she walked into the lake and died by suicide. Her family believes she was murdered. In Grosse Pointe, those facts have become landmarks. The church, the lonely Lexus in the exit drive, the short distance to the water, and the long distance to where JoAnn was finally found. Between them is the moment no one can place with certainty, the moment a woman leaves a place of prayer and disappears. That is where the case still lives, and why the same question keeps returning year after year. What happened to JoAnn Romain after she walked out of St. Paul on the lake? Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.